thanks to all the witnesses for bringing the facts and information to our conversation today. Professor Hung, I want to continue on with our dialogue on this, on the Belt and Road Initiative and what China's doing in countries around Africa, around multiple regions of Asia, around the Western Hemisphere, Central and South America, to be able to influence markets, but also to be able to control minerals, to control ports, control airports, and to be able to take on some of those sovereign debt. You have written about some of these issues, specifically about them taking on debt around the world and how sustainable that is, but also the effect for those individual countries as well. Can you elaborate more on that?
Thank you very much for the very important question. And actually, that is the design and the intention of the Chinese government to use Hong Kong as a kind of an offshore financial center, as to channel money and to finance a lot of this kind of Chinese companies going to Belt and Road. And in this regard, and Chinese definitely is extending a lot of loans and debt to the Belt and Road country. But at the same time, that U.S. still have a leverage to shape how this development can unfold, because many of the Belt and Road loans that or out of Belt and Road and bilateral loans or multilateral loans for the AIIB are actually denominated in US dollar. The reality is that the world economy is still very much reliant on the US dollar as the reserve currency and a kind of a transaction currency. And so a lot of these developing countries and in Asian countries, when they borrow money from China, they refuse to take a renminbi loan. And actually it's very typical development is that in the beginning, Chinese will try to lend in renminbi, but actually the debtor is not interested. So in the end, that China is lending in US dollar. And so far as China is relying on US dollar, then the many Chinese entities and Chinese corporations are relying on Hong Kong financial market to raise debt and bonds in US dollar and through the Hong Kong financial market raise capital in Hong Kong dollar, which is actually packed with the US dollar and fully convertible. So in this regard, in the international transaction clearance and through the SWIFT systems and also the Hong Kong access to US dollar, US still has a lot of leverage in influencing the China behavior in Belt and Road and the developing world.
Dr. Cooper, earlier, Ms. Wong was asked about Australia, and I want to be able to drill down this a little bit more on supply chain issues and what example we can take from what China has done using economic leverage on Australia to our own supply chain issues that we're facing now and the potential for that in the future. So Ms. Wong had the opportunity to be able to answer that. Dr. Cooper, I wanted you to be able to also talk about this as well. What should we see from the issue of Australia? What should we learn from that? And what awareness should we have on our own supply chain issues?
Well, thank you, Senator Lankford. I think Australia is a really important case for several reasons. The first is that actually China has struggled to get its political objectives obtained in Australia, and I think it's done remarkable damage to Beijing's cause. Now, I will admit that I think a lot of friends in China don't acknowledge how much damage China has done. But if you look at the objectives that China appeared to have, and here China was quite clear. In fact, the Chinese embassy in Canberra gave a list of 14 demands that they were seeking from the Australian government. And I think they've obtained precisely 0 of those demands through this economic coercion campaign. And in fact, if you look at the Australian economy, there are roughly 11 different products that were directly affected. Only 1 or 2 of those were not relatively quickly shifted to other global markets. So the damage done to the Australian economy has been much less significant than I think many in China and even many in Australia would have imagined. So I think it's a good reminder that, in fact, the world still has substantial leverage to push back against China, and even countries that are targeted can withstand that pressure, as Australia has. Now, it comes at a cost, but we're seeing increasingly that countries are willing to bear those costs, and I think the Lithuania case right now is another important example. So I think what we should take away from the Australian case is, first, you probably can't escape this kind of pressure unless you're going to fully agree with China on every issue, which very few countries and companies are willing to do. And second, that when the pressure comes, that countries can stand firm against it, especially if they have allies and partners that are willing to stand with them.
Dr. Cooper, thank you. Ms. Wong, you've talked extensively and written extensively on the issue of Taiwan. It's very different than Australia, very different than the United States in the threats that they face in Taiwan in particular. They're exceptionally isolated. Could you get a chance to talk about some of the economic pressures that are facing right there and in Taiwan, and what the United States in particular can do to be able to lessen some of the economic pressures, and what other countries, as China tries to cut off diplomatic relationships with any country that has diplomatic relationships with Taiwan, what other countries can do to actually support the people of Taiwan rather than isolate them?
Thank you. The topic of Taiwan is quite sensitive to the Chinese government, as we all know. Taiwan is one of the sensitive three Ts, along with Tibet and Tiananmen. Taiwan is increasingly under pressure from the Chinese authoritarian government. They're diplomatically isolating them, and they're bullying them on a geopolitical level. I think what we can do to support Taiwan is to continue these delegations to visit the island and to meet legislators there as well. I would also be happy to look into this in more detail and respond in writing for the record. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. I really see what China did with Hong Kong as the model of what they're going to try to do with Taiwan as well, to be able to buy off political figures, to be able to use social media, and to be able to control the conversation in Hong Kong, to then be able to move in, get the laws changed, and to be able to take over quietly as the model that they'll try to do in Taiwan as well. There's a real risk to that in the days ahead, and ways that we can continue to be able to stand with the people of Taiwan, to be able to get actually facts and information to them about the brutality of the communist government, what they've done in human rights violations, and to be able to continue to protect their free and fair elections in the days ahead will be a tremendous asset to them in the world, and then also to increase diplomatic conversations with others. So I appreciate very much the engagement, all the witnesses that are here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.